You got to have a plan. Everybody's got a dream. Everybody's got a goal. What's the plan?
The thing I would say is, when you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world, try not to bash into the walls too much, try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. But life, that's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it. You can influence it. You can build your own things that other people can use. And the minute that you understand that you can poke life and actually something will, if you push in, something will pop out the other side, that you can change it, you can mold it. That's maybe the most important thing, is to shake off this erroneous notion that life is there and you're just going to live in it, versus embrace it, change it, improve it, make your mark upon it. I think that's very important. And however you learn that, once you learn it, you'll want to change life and make it better, because it's kind of messed up in a lot of ways. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again.
You got to have a plan. Everybody's got a dream. Everybody's got a goal. What's the plan? And your plan has got to have something I call the C5 complex. Your plan has got to be clear, concise, compelling, consistent, and committed. You've got to have a plan. And when you're trying to do something that you're truly passionate about, there is no plan B.
Okay.
Plan B sucks.
All right. Okay, so it's as simple as that.
You got to have a plan. I mean, think about that for a second. 3 examples. Michael Jordan won 6 NBA championships with the Chicago Bulls because he was committed to plan A, not plan B. Oprah Winfrey became the queen of all media because she was committed to plan A, not plan B. Whatever your politics are, Barack Obama is sitting in the White House because he was committed to plan A, not plan B.
Okay.
Plan B sucks.
I feel so strongly that the reason I'm here is I dream big dreams. I dream the kind of dreams that other people said would not be possible. I'm also living proof. This isn't a Hollywood movie. I come literally from the other side of the tracks. If you saw where I grew up and we took a picture of it, the neighborhood, the setting, you'd say it's impossible that someone could come from there and get here. But it is possible. And not to sound too trite, it's possible because we still live in a country where the entrepreneurial spirit is so alive and so well. And anyone in this country, if you dream big and surround yourself with great people and leave your ego at the door and share success with others and have a little luck along the way, you can do anything. But there will be people along the way, and I remember this, who will say to you, you know, you're dreaming too big. It's not possible. Those things just can't happen. Don't allow anyone, friend, family, acquaintance, teachers, whoever it is, don't allow anyone to tell you that what you are dreaming for yourself and your family is not possible. It is possible. Don't be one of those people 20 years from now are going to be walking around in a 9-to-5 job, miserable and angry and bitter because you let your dreams get away from you because you did not believe strongly enough in yourself and what was possible. Don't allow that to happen. This is an unbelievable time. And I can't encourage you enough to continue to think that things are possible and that your dreams can come true.
Diversified identity in some fashion. I think this is important so that your self-worth isn't only associated with your startup, That's probably a controversial recommendation. What that means is you should actually spend time involved with other skills. So in San Francisco, for instance, many startup founders I know who are very efficient and effective have their startup rock climbing, they get outside, they do a few things so that if one goes well, they can remain optimistic each week, which is very difficult if you're only directed at your startup.
I love the game. I like the money, and the money is certainly a method of keeping score. But I don't do things for money. I do things because I enjoy doing them. That really sometimes can translate into more money than you would have made if you went just after the money.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing, and it's totally true. And the reason is because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard, and you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, if you're not having fun doing it and you don't really love it, you're going to give up. And that's what happens to most people, actually. If you really look at the ones that ended up being successful, unquote, in the eyes of society and the ones that didn't, oftentimes it's the ones that are successful loved what they did so they could persevere when it got really tough. And the ones that didn't love it quit because they're sane. Right? Who would want to put up with this stuff if you don't love it? So it's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of worrying constantly. And if you don't love it, you're going to fail. So you got to love it. You got to have passion.
Work for me regarding balance between family and business opportunities was always to be mindful of. In a tie, family comes first. My child always came first. If you've managed your relationships properly, the business presentation you're so concerned about, the big conference call that cannot happen without you on the phone, all those things can be rescheduled. But your son is going to have one first baseball game. Your daughter's going to have one first dance recital, and you gotta be there. In a tie, family wins.
How many people have you met in your life who have said things like, I had that idea, I knew about that, or I was so close but I gave up? I think sometimes the difference between success and failure, winning and losing, is a very fine line between those people who will continue to move forward.
I only invest in things that I understand and things that I use or would use myself. This is really, really, really important. Anytime I step outside of that is usually when the universe kicks me in the nuts really hard and I lose my money. I think it's critical to, as an entrepreneur, scratch your own itch. It increases the odds of success, or the probability of success. And then as an investor, I look for people who are scratching their own itch.
Never, ever give up. You can change and you can move around, but never, ever give up. I know people that are very smart. They went to the Wharton School of Finance with me. I know other people that aren't as smart, and those people are the top people in industry today, and they just were tougher. They didn't give up. And the smart ones had everything on their plate. They'd always come in with the A+ on the tests and the good boards and everything else. But when they ran into problems, they didn't know how to solve the problems like the guys that weren't as good. And it's very seldom that you see something other than this happen. So never, ever give up.
We had absolutely no idea what people were going to do these things when we started out. Matter of fact, the two people it was designed for was Woz and myself, because we couldn't afford to buy a computer kit on the market. So we liberated some parts from Hewlett-Packard and Atari, and worked on a design for about 6 months and decided that we would build our own computer. So we built one, and Woz was up till 4 in the morning for many moons, and we got it working. We showed some of our friends. Immediately, everybody wanted one. And it turned out that it took about 40 hours to build one of these things and about another 20, 30, 40 to debug it. And we had a lot of friends that worked at similar companies who could liberate the parts also. And we found ourselves spending every spare moment of our time helping our friends to build computers. And it was just getting to be a tremendous drain on our lives. So we got the idea one day that we could make a printed circuit board without the parts in it and sell these blank printed circuit boards to our friends and probably cut the assembly and debug time down to, 5-10 hours. So Woz sold his HP 6 calculator and I sold my van, and we got $1,300 together, and we paid our friend of ours who was this PC board layout person $1,300 to do us a layout, and decided we'd sell printed circuit boards at twice what it cost to build them and hopefully recoup our calculator and transportation at some later date. So that's what we did, and I was out trying to peddle PC boards one day and walked into a bite shop, the first bite shop in Mountain View, and Paul Terrell, the then owner of the bite shop, said he would like to take 50 of these computers. And I saw dollar signs in front of my eyes. But he had one catch, which was that he wanted them fully assembled and tested, ready to go, which is a new twist. So we spent the next 5 days on the phone to distributors and convinced the electronics parts distributors around here to give us about $10,000 worth of parts on thin air, just on enthusiasm. So we got the parts and we built 100 computers and we sold 50 of them for cash, and in 29 days paid off the distributors. And that's how we got started. So we had 50 computers left over. Well, that meant we had to sell them. So then we started worrying about marketing, worrying about distribution, got on the phone to the other computer stores around the country. And gradually the whole thing began to build momentum. And at that point in time, we had some feeling that we were onto something. But the feeling is so different than the experience of actually seeing it happen right now. It's entirely different. And sometimes a lot of people ask, well, did you know it was going to mushroom into this phenomenon? And you could say, yeah, we planned it out. We had lead on a piece of paper. But it's different than the experience of seeing 500 people working at Apple Computer. It's very different than the experience of seeing a 5-year-old kid who really understands the tool that he's got in front of him.
I made in my mind as a young guy, I wanted to become world-class at something. I just had to find out what the something was going to be. And the very first time that I walked into a Wall Street trading room, I knew this is it. The ticker tape is rolling, the phones are ringing off the hook, people are screaming and shouting out orders, bodies are flying all over the place, and what looked like chaos to anybody else, I could see the natural rhythm in it. It was like I was reading a sheet of music, and I knew this is where I'm supposed to be. I kept coming back. I wore one branch manager down to the point that he says to me, Gardner, based on persistence alone, we're going to give you a shot. Man, I quit my job. That was all I wanted. I went home and I told my ex, you know what? You said I couldn't do it, but guess what? I start in 2 weeks.
In August of '87, we had 11 stores and 100 employees in a dream to create a national retail company around the coffee experience, good coffee in America. But there was another dream I had, and that was to build a different type of company. A company that potentially could achieve the delicate balance between profitability and the fiscal responsibility of building shareholder value, but the balance of also having a heart, benevolence, and integrating a social conscience in everything the company would do. And hopefully one day, remember this was '87, the company would be known as much for its values, its culture, its guiding principles, as it would the quality of its coffee. Fast forward from '87 to '89 and 1990, the company was beginning to get some traction. We had about 50 stores. We still were not making money. And I think we all realized at the time that we were not in the coffee business serving people, but we were in the people business serving coffee. That if we wanted to exceed the expectations of the customer, we had to first exceed the expectations of our people. We made a very important strategic decision early on that franchising could not maintain the culture and values of the company, that all it would be an access to cheap capital. And so we continued on track of opening and building a company-owned system.
A lot of that is all in the details. You've got to be into the details, because if you're not, they'll come back to haunt you. So oftentimes, life is in the details. Well, business also is in the details. You have to be very careful. You have to watch the dotted I's, because you can really lose tremendously if you don't watch those details. So we discussed that, and as Robert likes to say, probably more than I do, that's the little finger, but it's all about the details. It's very important.
Too many of us for a long time have confused our net worth and our self-worth. Your net worth is going to fluctuate. It's going to go up and down. That's what money does. But your self-worth should not. Who you are, what's important to you, how you live, your values should never be negotiable, compromised, and should never settle. Again, we have gotten to this point where we've got to say to ourselves, my net worth is not my self-worth.
I've said for years that you have to celebrate your victories and really celebrate your mistakes. And what I mean by that is that you have to learn from the mistakes that you make, and you've got to create an environment where people are not afraid to take a risk and not afraid to do things that are beyond what the expectations are. At the same time, you've got to set up a framework for how those things are managed and judged and evaluated.
Need to know what your unique strengths are and be willing to delegate. So I would say that the question of whether you should take a skill, learn it yourself, delegate it to someone else, or hire a new team member are determined by having a very accurate self-assessment, an assessment of your team's skills. Not only what you can do, but what you should be doing. That's very important. So if you're a startup CEO or founder and you have a team of, say, 2 to 10 people, as soon as you have funds to hire, you should not be focused on the things that you are bad at. It sounds very, very intuitive, but it's not, because you might have enough time to do those things, but the question is, do you have the attention to dedicate to those things so they're not an interruption? Especially if you're a venture-backed startup and you're competing against other companies that also have a lot of funding, the game and the race goes to the swift. So you have to have a lot of velocity.
You want to be totally focused. You can't take your eye off the ball. When I had troubles in the early 90s, a major article came out and it said very strongly, everything he touches turns to gold. And I believed it. So I'd go out with models at night instead of working. But that wasn't good. And I remember I had a big lease coming up, and there was a big show, and I went to the show. I said, don't worry, fellas, you can handle the lease, you'll get it done. Well, I came back, they didn't get it done, and I would have had it done 100%. And then the market crashed in the 90s. So I had trouble, but it was sort of an amazing, I wouldn't want to do it again. It was an amazing test of yourself. Can you handle pressure? How are you under pressure? Are you smart? You know, when everybody's coming at you.
People are self-managing. They don't need to be managed. Once they know what to do, they'll go figure out how to do it. They don't need to be managed at all. What they need is a common vision, and that's what leadership is. What leadership is having a vision, being able to articulate that so the people around you can understand it, and getting a consensus on a common vision. We wanted people that were insanely great at what they did, but we're not necessarily those seasoned professionals, but who had at the tips of their fingers and in their passion the latest understanding of where technology was and what we could do with that technology, and who wanted to bring that to lots of people. So the neatest thing that happens is when you get a core group of 10 great people, it becomes self-policing as to who they let into that group. So I consider the most important job of someone like myself is recruiting.
How you motivate key employees, I believe, is number one. You got to respect them. You got to let them grow, and you got to trust them and leave them alone. And you have to also show them the opportunity to make more money than they've ever made in their lives. All of that combined, that's how you motivate your key core employees.
But I believed very strongly that we could build a different kind of company. I never believed, never, I think it would have been arrogant to believe, that we could have 1,000, 2,000, or 7,500 stores in the U.S. and around the world. But something really magical started happening. And it started happening as a result of not advertising or conventional consumer classical marketing. The fact is that Starbucks spends very little on traditional advertising. It started happening because we demonstrated to ourselves and now the world that to build an enduring, sustainable, long-term business and consumer brand, it's not about fancy marketing. It's about establishing a very powerful and unusual emotional relationship with the customer.
Need to be able to sell. Whether it's Kickstarter, whether it's New York Times, whether it's your local newspaper, you need to be able to communicate effectively and sell, which is why when entrepreneurs ask me for books to read outside of business books, I say On Writing Well, Bird by Bird, all books on writing, improving communication. David Ogilvy on advertising, study print ads where you have very little space. I think those are all very, very effective. The best entrepreneurs I've ever met are all good communicators. It's perhaps one of the very few unifying factors. They're exceptional communicators. Practice is the only way to get better at communicating. And practicing speaking does not provide you generally with something to review later, which is why the written word is so powerful. Yeah. Writing is thought crystallized on a piece of paper that can then be reviewed. It's very difficult to do that with speech, which is why I recommend people focus on honing their skills in writing. And take time to study good direct response ads. Take time to, for instance, maybe develop a swipe file. So one of the things that I did for years is anytime I bought something, I would identify the ad, the phone call, the print ad, the offer, whatever it was that made me decide to buy it, and I would either cut it out or record it, put it into Evernote, whatever it might be, and save it. So I had a record of everything that I bought and why I bought it. And then I could go back and review it, and I'd be like, oh, looks like I fell for this, this, and this. Not in a bad way, but it looks like this tipped me from or not interested to, yeah, I'll spend $550, $500, $5,000 on that. Yeah. I save all that. Everything that works in sales has been done already. You do not need to reinvent the wheel. So just keep track of the crap that you buy, or the awesome stuff that you buy, and decide, what was the trigger, what pushed me over the edge, and then just sell to people like you. That's what I do. It's really easy. People are like, who's your market? I'm like, well, I'm a 30-something SF-based tech-savvy male, so why don't I just sell to those people? It makes it a lot easier than trying to guess.
No, the worst employee is a good employee. A bad employee is fine because you fire that person right away. A great employee is phenomenal. You want to keep them and cherish them. They're fantastic. But a good employee, you never sort of fire them, but they never lead you to the next level. They just keep their job. They're sort of too good to be fired, but they're not good enough. You're never going to do great. So I always say the worst employee isn't a bad employee. It's just a good or average employee.
It's very interesting. I was worth about over $1 million when I was 23, and over $10 million when I was 24, and over $100 million when I was 25. And it wasn't that important because I never did it for the money. I think money is a wonderful thing because it enables you to do things. It enables you to invest in ideas that don't have a short-term payback and things like that. But especially at that point in my life, it was not the most important thing. The most important thing was the company, the people, the products we were making, what we were going to enable people to do with these products. So I didn't think about it a great deal. I never sold any stock and just really believed that the company would do very well over the long term.
If you're looking to instigate a change in your life, there's no better or worse time than right now. Hey, I understand. Change is scary. With the status quo, you know what you've got. If you shake things up, there's no telling what you might end up with. But two other things are true about change. One, it's absolutely necessary for personal growth, and two, it's gonna happen. Either you can pick the time to instigate the change you want, or the change and the time will pick you. So if you happen to be one of those people who's standing on the sidelines of your dreams, waiting for that perfect moment, if you want to make that change but you just don't know if you're ready, this life lesson is for you. It's time to stop digging your potatoes and jump.
But I'm also here to tell you that I feel strongly that long-term value for your shareholders cannot be achieved in an enduring, sustainable way unless the management of the company is completely and comprehensively committed to creating long-term value for the employees. And the two are directly linked together. And any company, any management team that turns its back on its people and doesn't share the success of the company with the people who do the work are not going to finish the race.
Ideas are worth nothing. I mean, ideas are really, they're not a dime a dozen. They're just nothing. All the good founders I know, even the bad founders, can come up with ideas all day long. It doesn't mean anything. You have to be able to execute. And one of the sort of maxims that I was told once was, your success will be measured in the number of uncomfortable conversations you're willing to have. So I often get asked if an entrepreneur should, say, start a business based on one of their passions, or if they should find the most attractive market opportunity and build a business out of that, whether they like it or not. I don't think it's either or. I think you need both. I would say look at your own credit card statement. Identify where you spend an unusual percentage of your income. Where are you price insensitive? Then how old are you? What gender are you? Where do you live? And design a product that has all of those things intersecting.
Gary Player, the great golfer, he was a little guy, very little, but he worked really hard. And he had a great statement, but he'd go, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And he wins the US Open. You have all these big, handsome guys, these big, giant guys, and they're hitting the ball a mile. And you have Gary Player. And Gary Player would win the Open. He'd win the Masters. He'd win this. He'd win that. And he said, hey, in the US Open, he hit a 5-iron to 1 foot from the hole, and he ended up getting a birdie and wins the US Open, right? And he came off the green. Now, I know I've heard the statement before, but I heard it from him in a meaningful way. They said, what do you think, Gary? What is it? He said, all I know is I've been working very hard, and the harder I work, the luckier I get. I thought it was an amazing statement.
Our goal is to make the best personal computers in the world and to make products we are proud to sell and would recommend to our family and friends. And we want to do that at the lowest prices we can. But I have to tell you, there's some stuff in our industry that we wouldn't be proud to ship, that we wouldn't be proud to recommend to our family and friends. And we can't do it. We just can't ship junk. So there are thresholds that we can't cross because of who we are. But we want to make the best personal computers in the industry. And what you'll find is our products are usually not premium priced. You go and price out our competitors' products, and you add the features that you have to add to make them useful, and you'll find in some cases they are more expensive than our products. The difference is we don't offer stripped down, lousy products. We just don't offer categories of products like that. But if you move those aside and compare us with our competitors, I think we compare pretty favorably. And a lot of people have been doing that and saying that now for the last 18 months.
Baby steps count too, as long as you're going forward. And one day you add all those baby steps up and you might be surprised at where you can get to. But more importantly, I remember something my mom used to say to me every day. She would say, son, the cavalry ain't coming. You got to do this yourself. Ain't no backup. Okay? Mm-hmm. And when you put those two things together, man, it wasn't as hard to keep going forward as you might think.
I think something that has happened the last couple of years that I have noticed, which I think is powerful, and it is a sea change, is that the consumer has begun in many ways to perform what I would call loosely a cultural audit of companies, of brands, and of products and services that they are asked to support, to buy. And the cultural audit goes something like, for the first time, businesses recognize that there is parity in the marketplace. Parity on price, parity on features and benefits, and the consumer, as a result of that, has significant choices as to what they're going to buy and support. But for the first time, they're asking questions beyond the characteristics of the product or the service. They're asking about values. They're asking questions about how you take care of your people, whether or not you're giving back to the community in which they live and work.
It's very easy to be seduced by doing things efficiently, trying to do a lot of things well. I don't believe that's the most important thing. The most important thing is picking the right things to do in the first place. And that's being effective versus just being efficient. So within a startup, it's success, I don't think, is measured by how many things you can do at once. It's measured by how effectively you're able to pick the one or two things that are the highest priority. And there's always going to be a seduction to get distracted and focus on 20 things at once. And the most effective entrepreneurs I know are very good at focusing on one or two things and either eliminating the rest or delegating it to other people or outsourcing it, so it's not done within the team, but it's actually to third parties.
Times in life, to be successful, oftentimes, most of the time, you have to follow your instincts. You have to follow your gut. You have to. Your parents may say wrong, your whoever may say wrong, but you have to do it.
You can please some of the people some of the time, but one of the hardest things when you're trying to affect change is that people like this gentleman are right in some areas. I'm sure that there are some things OpenDoc does, probably even more that I'm not familiar with, that nothing else out there does. And I'm sure that you can make some demos, maybe a small commercial app that demonstrates those things. The hardest thing is, how does that fit in to a cohesive, larger vision that's going to allow you to sell $8 billion, $10 billion of product a year? And one of the things I've always found is that you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. And as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that. And I think that's the right path to take. I remember with the laser writer, we built the world's first small laser printers, you know, and there was awesome technology in that box. We had the first Canon cheap laser printing engine in the world, in the United States here at Apple. We had a very wonderful printer controller that we designed. We had Adobe's PostScript software in there. We had AppleTalk in there. Just awesome technology in the box. And I remember seeing the first printout come out of it and just picking it up and looking at it and thinking, you know, we can sell this. because you don't have to know anything about what's in that box. All we have to do is hold this up and go, do you want this? And if you can remember back to 1984, before laser printers, it was pretty startling to see that. People went, whoa, yes. And that's where Apple's got to get back to. And, you know, I'm sorry that OpenDoc's a casualty along the way, and I readily admit there are many things in life that I don't have the faintest idea what I'm talking about. So I apologize for that too. But there's a whole lot of people working super, super hard right now at Apple. You know, Avi, John, Garino, Fred, I mean, the whole team is working, burning the midnight oil, trying to, and people, you know, hundreds of people below them, to execute on some of these things, and they're doing their best. And I think that what we need to do, and some mistakes will be made, by the way. Some mistakes will be made along the way. That's good, because at least some decisions are being made along the way. And we'll find the mistakes, we'll fix them. I think what we need to do is support that team going through this very important stage as they work their butts off. They're all getting calls, being offered 3 times as much money to go do this, do that, the valley's hot. None of them are leaving. And I think we need to support them and see them through this and write some damn good applications to support Apple out in the market. That's my own point of view. Mistakes will be made. Some people will be pissed off. Some people will not know what they're talking about. But I think it is so much better than where things were not very long ago. And I think we're going to get there.
Well, now that we can see how short life really can be, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? That's a trigger. That's the biggest trigger that I have ever experienced. What are you going to do the rest of your life? And what I had to do is I had to start taking some of my own advice. I have been telling people, I had written about it for a very long time, that if you're doing something that you're not totally committed to, if you're doing something that you're not totally passionate about, you're compromising yourself every day.
I think that success in business is a very difficult thing to achieve. And it's more difficult today probably than any other time, despite the vast number of opportunities. And as it relates to finding your calling in terms of what the opportunity or the entrepreneurial adventure is going to be, it has to be linked to something that you are so passionate and crazed about that you're willing to knock down walls and climb mountains and do the things that are going to put yourself in a position of sacrificing so many other things for its success. And you can only do that when there's a compelling underlying feeling that you have that this is something I'm going to fight to the death for. And without that, I think it's going to be a commodity-based experience, not only for the customer, but for you. And I think you can't really succeed at the levels that you want to unless you find that thing that you're so passionate, excited, and in love with. And I think because you've got to, along the way, you're going to have to convince so many other people to believe in you and the idea and the opportunity, and the struggle and the obstacles that are going to come can only be overcome by this passion that you have, in which you're going to be able to get people to follow you over those hurdles. I know it sounds a little bit sophomoric, but it's so true.
First-time entrepreneurs tend to miscalculate is everything. What I mean by that is optimism has a place, but I think even more so for the first-time entrepreneur, you need to be pragmatically pessimistic. What I mean by that is you need to define all of the worst-case scenarios in terms of financial loss, time loss, etc. Look at what you will learn if that happens and accept and come to terms with that before you ever start. If you don't do that and you go straight into battling the world, trying to conquer the world with rose-colored glasses on, the first time you hit a major hiccup, you're going to become really demoralized and you will quit. So optimism, all that rah, 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 that's awesome. But you need to hope for the best and prepare for the worst before you ever get started. I always recommend.
much of success is seeing yourself as victorious. You have to see yourself. You have to really believe in yourself. And sometimes it's hard. You know, you've had failures, you've had weaknesses, you've had other things. You have to see yourself as a one-man band. Don't rely too much on other people because they'll let you down. You have to see yourself as victorious. And to be a winner, you have to think like a winner. If you don't think like a winner, it's just never going to happen.
To me, marketing's about values. This is a very complicated world. It's a very noisy world. And we're not going to get a chance to get people to remember much about us. No company is. And so we have to be really clear on what we want them to know about us. Now, Apple, fortunately, is one of the half a dozen best brands in the whole world. Right up there with Nike, Disney, Coke, Sony. It is one of the greats of the greats, not just in this country, but all around the globe. And, but even a great brand needs investment and caring if it's going to retain its relevance and vitality. And the Apple brand has clearly suffered from neglect in this area in the last few years. And we need to bring it back. The way to do that is not to talk about speeds and feeds. It's not to talk about MIPS and megahertz. It's not to talk about why we're better than Windows. The dairy industry tried for 20 years to convince you that milk was good for you. It's a lie, but they tried anyway. And the sales were going like this. And then they tried Got Milk, and the sales are going like this. Got Milk doesn't even talk about the product. Matter of fact, it focuses on the absence of the product. But the best example of all, and one of the greatest jobs of marketing that the universe has ever seen is Nike. Remember, Nike sells a commodity. They sell shoes. And yet, when you think of Nike, you feel something different than a shoe company. In their ads, as you know, they don't ever talk about the products. They don't ever tell you about their air soles and why they're better than Reebok's air soles. What does Nike do in their advertising? They honor great athletes and they honor great athletics. That's who they are. That's what they are about. Apple spends a fortune on advertising. You'd never know it. You'd never know it. So when I got here, Apple just fired their agency. They were doing a competition with 23 agencies that, 4 years from now would pick one. And we blew that up, and we hired Chiat, the ad agency that I was fortunate enough to work with years ago. We created some award-winning work, including the commercial voted the best ad ever made in 1984 by advertising professionals. And we started working about 8 weeks ago. And the question we asked was, our customers want to know who is Apple and what is it that we stand for? Where do we fit in this world? And what we're about isn't making boxes for people to get their jobs done, although we do that well. We do that better than almost anybody in some cases. But Apple's about something more than that. Apple, at the core, its core value, is that we believe that people with passion can change the world for the better. That's what we believe. And we've had the opportunity to work with people like that. We've had an opportunity to work with people like you, with software developers, with customers who have done it in some big and some small ways. And we believe that in this world, people can change it for the better. And that those people that are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that actually do. And so what we're going to do in our first brand marketing campaign in several years is to get back to that core value. A lot of things have changed. The market's a totally different place than it was a decade ago. And Apple's totally different, and Apple's place in it is totally different. And believe me, the products and the distribution strategies and the manufacturing are totally different, and we understand that. But values and core values, those things shouldn't change. The things that Apple believed in at its core are the same things that Apple really stands for today. And so we wanted to find a way to communicate that. And what we have is something that I'm very moved by. It honors those people who have changed the world. Some of them are living, some of them are not. But the ones that aren't, as you'll see, you know that if they'd ever used a computer, it would have been a Mac. The theme of the campaign is Think Different. It's the people, honoring the people who think different and who move this world forward. And it is what we are about. It touches the soul of this company.
I was presentable, but I wore the same two suits.
Yeah.
I had two suits, man, that I had to wear every day for a year. One blue, one gray. The joke around the office started, oh, that's Chris Gardner, he's reenacting the Civil War. Some days he's with the North, some days he's with the South.
This is the key of unlocking the success of our business and hopefully the businesses that you either are thinking about, working for, or a part of. And it's this, it's so basic. We all want the same thing. Break away the differences between what I just described, language, politics, the way people dress, their history, it doesn't matter. We all want the same thing. We want to be respected as employees. We want to be appreciated as customers. We want to feel dignified in the workplace and who we are as people. And we want to go into a store and for that brief moment of whether we're buying a cup of coffee or whatever it might be, we want some value for our money. And the human condition of all of that between business and the consumer and everything else in between is the human condition of the human spirit. If you can exceed the expectations of your people, if they feel they're working in an enterprise or a company that values them as human beings and not as paychecks, values them as human beings and not a line item on the balance sheet, and they in turn can take that feeling of being respected and appreciated as an employee and share that with someone else, a paying customer. Whether it's in Kuwait or Dubai or the opening of Starbucks France where people said it wouldn't be possible, it can work and it is sustainable. Because the human spirit has no language. And at a time in the world when there is such cynicism and a fracturing of trust, if you reach out and appreciate and respect another human being, it comes back to you.
It's important to have at least one or two numbers that you track on a weekly basis. Okay. So that could be for web-based properties or services or products. It could be weekly average uniques. What it is doesn't matter that much, but matters less than having a metric that you try to improve every week. You could have one or two of them. You really shouldn't have many more than that, I don't think. Could be conversion from sign up to, let's say, first stage of sign up to completion of sign up. There are many different metrics that you can use, but I think that to keep the team focused, especially in a small company, it's very important to have one or two that you focus on a weekly basis.
Many people have been asking about my desk and the fact that I have so many papers on my desk. It's actually very neat. I know where everything is, but if you look around, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. The fact is, I'm busy. I always notice that busy people, people that are very successful in many cases, have a lot going on their desk. I have papers from deals, I have papers from just about everything. I like to read up on things, I like to study what I'm doing. So therefore, you have a lot of action going on in your office. Now, some of the writers, some of the ones that aren't so smart, they talk about the desk negatively. They say, oh, isn't it terrible? Trump has so many papers on his desk. Let's analyze everything on the desk. And they do the best and they fail. But the fact is, I've noticed over the years, successful people have a lot going on their desk. My desk is in my office. My desk is a very important part of me. And frankly, it's a very important part of my success. Everything I do comes right through this desk. So if it's not perfectly neat, if there's a lot of action, I think that's okay. I actually think that's a good thing.
I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of Reed College after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. So why'd I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute that they really wanted a girl. So my parents, who were on a waiting list, got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college. But I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was, spending all the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference. My second story is about love and loss. I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. Woz and I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I had let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me. I met with David Packard and Bob Noyce and tried to apologize for screwing up so badly. I was a very public failure, and I even thought about running away from the valley. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. The turn of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love. And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next, and I returned to Apple, and the technology we developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And Lorene and I have a wonderful family together. I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love, and that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking, and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And like any great relationship, it just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking. Don't settle. My third story is about death. When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, "If you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right. It made an impression on me, and since then, for the past 33 years, I've looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a scan at 7:30 in the morning, and it clearly showed a tumor on my pancreas. I didn't even know what a pancreas was. The doctors told me this was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that I should expect to live no longer than 3 to 6 months. My doctor advised me to go home and get my affairs in order, which is doctor's code for prepare to die. It means to try and tell your kids everything. You thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes. I lived with that diagnosis all day. Later that evening, I had a biopsy where they stuck an endoscope down my throat, through my stomach and into my intestines, put a needle into my pancreas and got a few cells from the tumor. I was sedated, but my wife, who was there, told me that when they viewed the cells under a microscope, the doctors started crying because it turned out to be a very rare form of pancreatic cancer that is curable with surgery. I had the surgery, and thankfully, I'm fine now. This was the closest I've been to facing death, and I hope it's the closest I get for a few more decades. Having lived through it, I can now say this to you with a bit more certainty than when death was a useful but purely intellectual concept. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet, death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. Right now, the new is you. But someday, not too long from now, you will gradually become the old and be cleared away. Sorry to be so dramatic, but it's quite true. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. When I was young, there was an amazing publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was one of the Bibles of my generation. It was created by a fellow named Stuart Brand, not far from here in Menlo Park, and he brought it to life with his poetic touch. This was in the late 60s, before personal computers and desktop publishing, so it was all made with typewriters, scissors, and Polaroid cameras. It was sort of like Google in paperback form 35 years before Google came along. It was idealistic, overflowing with neat tools and great notions. Stuart and his team put out several issues of the Whole Earth Catalog, and then, when it had run its course, they put out a final issue. It was the mid-1970s, and I was your age. On the back cover of their final issue was a photograph of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I have always wished that for myself. And now, as you graduate to begin anew, I wish that for you. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.